Well, that was the scene in question period today following the Chief Electoral Officer's appearance at a committee. Mark Meran is a mild-mannered officer of Parliament, but he was extremely outspoken on the Fair Elections Act, which is rabidly opposed by opposition parties as well. Let's bring in the diverse opinions of our MP panel. Aaron O'Toole is a parliamentary secretary in the Harper government. Charlie Angus is an NDP MP. Jeff Reagan is a Liberal MP. Welcome to you all. I don't even know where to begin with Meran's objections to the bill. What were the most serious ones in your view, Charlie Angus?
Well, let's put this in context. The push to get electoral reform and the changes to the Election Act were a direct result of widespread robo-fraud in the last election. Elections Canada tried to investigate. They were stonewalled in their attempt to get witnesses by the Conservatives, but in court it was found the robo-fraud was traced back to the Conservative database. So we know there's actual fraud. What Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Harper have done is flipped it. No longer are we talking about Conservative fraud. We're talking about ordinary Canadians defrauding the system. They've been making facts up. Mr. Butt came into the House and lied about witnessing crimes that didn't exist. They're trying to tell Canadians about issues that are non-existent. And so Mr. Meran comes in today and says this is a complete fabrication. This is not true. What is actually going to happen is the disenfranchisement of over 100,000 Canadians. Taking away the ability of seniors and students and First Nation people to vote is a serious issue. And we have Mr. Poilievre standing up in the House telling Canadians that the man whose job it is to ensure fair elections in this country doesn't know what he's talking about. It was astounding.
Okay, Jeff, we'll get your thoughts before we go to Aaron for the rebuttal.
Well, one of the things that really concerns me is that here was the Commissioner of Elections saying that he needs the power to compel people to testify because he's having trouble doing the investigations that he's been trying to do since the last election. And it seems that word has gone out to those Conservative operatives who he's been trying to talk to, that they don't actually have to cooperate, they don't actually have to answer any questions. Somehow they all know what the law says about this at the moment. So I think the Conservatives should stop protecting election fraud, which is essentially what they're trying to do with this bill. What we've seen already is that they've brought in this C-23, they're ramming it through Parliament, they use time allocation to limit debate at second reading. Now they're trying to block the committee from hearing from Canadians with their concerns about this bill. And what this bill really is a smokescreen to make it, to gut Elections Canada and to make it harder for Elections Canada to investigate fraud and breaches of the Elections Act by Conservatives.
Aaron, I guess I like your thoughts on that, but also in the context of, you know, there is a bit of a rush on to get this thing through, or it seems there is some time allocation being put, and yet you have the Chief Electoral Officer with a very long list of objections saying there's no democracy in the world that has this many proposed limitations to be put on it. What's wrong with taking the time to actually do this right? Because you're not the only party that runs for elections, they all do.
Well, a lot of the parts of the Fair Elections Act have recommendations that come either directly from the Chief Elections Officer himself or the Neufeld report that they commissioned after the serious irregularities in the last election. I attended part of the Procedure and Affairs Committee hearings today and heard Mr. Meran, and I was actually shocked that the estimates of irregularities that he has provided, you know, which are in the 100,000 plus, aren't a fully accurate number because he's only done a sampling from about 1,000 polling locations. So the estimates of 25% error rate with vouching, for example, are really just estimates. But we live in an age where we can actually solve these irregularities. It's not unreasonable to ask Canadians to bring one of 39 pieces of ID and validate their citizenship, their age, and where they live. These are not unreasonable demands.
No.
No one is going to be disenfranchised at all. This is about making sure that his own report says that 25% of vouching cases are irregularities. Whether they're fraud or just simple mistakes, they can be fixed. And there's a lot of games being played on this.
He does say this voter identification card is probably the best form of ID because it's validated.
There's a mistake you're making there that is part of their bag of tricks. It's the voter information card. It's not an identification card, and it's only been around for the last 2 elections. So it's a pilot project. So how did our democracy survive before this voter information card? It did. So that was something that reminded people of polling stations near them. It's not intended to be identification. And Elections Canada's own report says 1 in 6 of those cards has errors in it.
Quick thoughts from you on that, Charlie?
Well, before they had the voter cards, they used to do remuneration at the door. They used to go and check, and you were on the voters list, and that was an excellent system. They did away with that. I can ask your viewers, how many senior citizens out there, people living in seniors' homes, who rely on this? You know, my father didn't have photo ID. He didn't drive. My mother doesn't drive. I know many seniors in our riding who rely on this, and as Mr. Mayran said, they bring this plus another piece of IDs. But again, Mr. O'Toole, like Mr. Butt, is changing the subject. This was about the issue of voter fraud and what had happened in the last election, and now they're turning it around. So they're saying the problem is people who have a democratic right, a constitutional right to vote, we need to make it more difficult for them.
All right, Jeff, I want to get you on a topic because you're from Nova Scotia, and this comes from there, too. A cartoon in the Pictou Advocate today shows a swastika flag flying over Parliament's buildings with the words, Harper's Economic Action Plan under it. We can't show you the image because symbols of hate are prohibited in Canada, but it, as I said, it certainly triggered a reaction from the local MP, which is Peter MacKay. Here's what Peter MacKay had to say in reaction.
To in any way associate the Nazi flag, a swastika, with our peace tower is offensive in the extreme. It's offensive to veterans. It's certainly offensive to Jewish Canadians. It's offensive to all Canadians. So I've told the owner of that paper my feelings about it. I asked and suggested that he would issue an apology.
Jeff, there's freedom of speech. I mean, we have to defend it, but that seems to be a little extreme to you. What's your reaction to that?
I agree with you that you know, we may disagree with the government on lots of things. I think that's inappropriate, and you don't make that comparison. It's, you know, we just remember how serious the events of the Nazis, you know, their activities were, and how strongly people feel about that, and rightly so. But I don't think it's appropriate to make that comparison, no matter, you know, what you may feel about my political opponents.
All right, Charlie Angus, any thoughts?
I always remember Alex Melashenko, Northern Ontario, and one time when he was protesting Mike Harris, and I said to him, boy, they're acting like stormtroopers, and he said, I came from a Ukrainian labor camp. It's not like that. Yeah. And I think that that's what we need to remember. We get upset. We get upset when our democracy is challenged in any way, but we always have to say what happened under the Nazi regime is fundamentally different. And what's happening in Canada, we're fighting with each other. We certainly don't like the direction of the government, but it's not the same. And it's unfortunate these things happen. I think what we should do is just step back and remind ourselves that we have to protect democracy, and we also have to not ever go there.
Last word to you.
I'm glad I agree with my colleagues.
Isn't that nice? You guys all agree.
Respect their view. You know, my colleague Gerald Keddy gave a statement in the House on this, and we were talking with Peter as well. The Peace Tower in particular represents the sacrifice, and every day a page in the memorial book is turned in that tower of people that actually died, many of whom fighting the Nazis. So we can have a really dynamic and passionate debate without really stooping to that level. But, you know, I'm glad it's provoked a response like this. I hope the paper does the right thing and apologize.
Exactly. All right, we were going to talk about the CRTC saying there's not enough Canadian content in porn channels, but I'll spare you that conversation.
I didn't even know we had a Canadian porn channel.
Charlie Angus telling me he used to play, his band used to play in a strip club, but so there you go. All right.
18.
He's our resident expert, I guess.
All right, thank you guys. Have a good break, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.